Hi, I'm Movie Man. I'm an octopus who reviews movies, and today's review is going to be on. This was a movie which I honestly didn't have the biggest expectations for, because obviously this movie is distributed by Blumhouse, and even though I have liked a lot of their movies in the past, last year was, for the most part anyway, not a very good year for them, as I'm sure we all remember, because aside from Speak No Evil, the majority of the films that they gave us last year were just kind of a bunch of stinkers, just a bunch of really generic slop with a bunch of cheap jump scares and kind of low body counts. Yeah, this movie kind of looks to be something a bit similar from the trailers. The trailer for this movie just made it look, really generic. Again, just looking like another one of these kind of movies that Blumhouse put out last year. And not to mention, it also kind of just looks like a carbon copy of that movie, The Woman in Black. If you've ever seen it, this film kind of just looked like a carbon copy of that pretty much. But anyway, the movie came out there nearly a week ago now. And I went to see it there this past weekend for myself. Having seen The Woman in the Yard, what did I ultimately think of it? I will say, this movie was actually a bit different to what I was expecting. Because as I said, from the trailer, I kind of did just think that, this was gonna be, just yet another, really kind of generic little horror film with jump scares and, just something that isn't really that scary, just kind of something that's more lame, if anything. That's kind of what I thought this movie was going to be from the trailers, but it turns out that the film was marketed to be a bit different to what the actual movie was, because this film is actually a bit different to what the trailers made it look. I will say, the movie did go in a direction that I honestly wasn't really expecting. But with that being said though, does that mean that I thought the movie was actually, good? Nope. Not at all, actually. Trust me, this film sucks, honestly, yeah. I did not enjoy this film very much, yeah. This was quite a bad movie in my opinion, but the only thing with it though is that it sucked, but it sucked in a way that I wasn't expecting it to suck. But it still sucked regardless. Now, anyway, let me actually get into my full thoughts on The Woman in the Yard. So, first off, I'll say this, the cinematography in the movie is actually quite good. I will say there actually is some genuinely good shots in the film, because obviously with this movie, we're being set, kind of on this farmhouse in the countryside, I think, and there is some genuinely cool, shots of some of the grass and some of the area. There is some nice shots there, and even kind of some of the close-up shots of the woman, and some kind of shots of her from, out from the window. Like there actually is some kind of cool kind of panning shots during some of these scenes. Like, I will give props to the film's cinematographer because he actually did a good job. So yeah, overall the cinematography in the movie is solid, but what I can't exactly say the same about is the film's editing, because I'm sorry, but this movie's editing just got way too zany and over the top for my liking. In particular, there's this opening scene, right? And all throughout it, we're just flashing and zooming our way and cutting back and forth with, all these different little areas, and we're hearing some of the characters' narration over it, and honestly, it's just quite annoying. And yeah, they do that a few times in the movie, I believe, and I just don't really think there was much need for it. I can tell it was kind of an artistic choice, but I personally just found it quite annoying, to be honest, and I will say this is a warning to anyone who can suffer from, photosensitive epilepsy. There is a scene in this movie. It's kind of set in the attic, and during this point in the film, the lights just start flashing on and off. And I will say it actually just does get quite bad for that. As I said, if you do have photosensitive epilepsy, then I definitely do not recommend that scene, especially because it is just way too flashy and stuff. And I don't really have too much of a problem with that stuff myself, but even when that scene was on, I even had to actually look down away from the screen a bit because it got that bad, yeah. But overall, I just don't think the editing in this movie is very good. I appreciate, kind of some artistic choices that they tried to take with it, but ultimately, I just thought they got way too over the top and zany with it. So yeah, also I don't think it really benefited the movie all that much. In terms of the film's pace, now thankfully I will say this movie isn't too long. The movie is really only an hour and 28 minutes, I think. So yeah, thankfully the movie isn't even an hour and a half long. So yeah, it's not a movie that's going to be too long. And yeah, to be fair, I don't think it really felt like too long of a film. But if you're really not into, films that kind of go at a bit of a slow pace, then I don't think you're going to like this one all that much. Because I'll be honest, this movie can kind of just trudge on by a bit. There is a bunch of scenes throughout this where, we just have our characters and, they're kind of just going on about stuff. And, yeah, these scenes can go on for, a little bit. And I'll be honest, this movie can be quite boring during a lot of this. Like, there'll just be points during this movie where, you're watching these characters and, they're just having all this stuff going on, and you have this woman just sitting outside their home, but really there's not really much that's interesting out of it. And yeah, really they just should have done a way better job if they were gonna go for this kind of approach with it, because really, I don't think it made the movie very interesting at all, to be honest. Yeah, so overall, I'd say the pace in this movie isn't great either. In terms of the sounds and music, I'll give the movie this. There actually is some pretty cool sound effects in here. I mean, we have some admittedly pretty cool sound effects, like actually from the woman and kind of some of these sounds that we do here. There actually is some solid sound work, so I'll give the movie that. In terms of the music, honestly, I really don't have anything to say. Like, this is just not a very memorable score. I'd say I'm quite mixed on the sound and music. Now getting on to the characters and the performances in this movie. Now, our main protagonist of this film is basically the mother of this family who we focus on, who is named Ramona. Now, I will admit, like, there definitely was kind of some potential with her character because basically the movie establishes that, she was in a car accident with her husband dies, and now she's been left in crutches and she's become the widow to her children. Like, there was stuff that honestly could have been interesting with her character, but ultimately I just don't think I was able to like actually, feel for her all that much. Like, a majority of like her kind of screen time is, like her like when she's kind of arguing with her kids and stuff, and like I also I guess why all that's happening in the movie and stuff, but like I don't know, I just didn't really feel like I could actually kind of really fully care about her character. There was kind of a solid idea, or a concept for this character, but I just don't really think they executed all that well, and it is a shame too, because I will admit, Danielle Deadwyler, who plays Ramona, she honestly does do a solid job in this movie. Like, she definitely does her best giving this movie a performance in which she really does attempt to elevate the material. But even then, I really just could not care for her character that much. Same with her children as well. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I do think the two actors that played her kids did solid enough for this material that they were given, but it just wasn't enough for me to care or get invested with this family. And then there's also the woman herself, and like, yeah, I don't know, I didn't really like her that much as a horror villain. Like, all I'll say is, like, she really just does not do anything that interesting for most of the film. Like, I will say, there is a good majority of this movie where she is kind of just sitting outside on the front yard, and she's not really doing anything. Like, and she does eventually try to do stuff later on in the movie, but I just felt the movie took a bit too long to get to that. I'll admit the actress who plays her does a solid job. I honestly won't even try to attempt to pronounce this actress's name, but she does do a solid job for what screen time she's given in this, but again, it just wasn't enough for me to actually care about anything. Like, it actually kind of get me, invested in this woman as a villain. Like, so, yeah, ultimately, even though the cast did solid enough, I just wasn't able to get invested in these characters that much. And in terms of the plot of this movie, like, I mean, the movie has, a concept that could be interesting. We have this woman who just randomly shows up one day out of nowhere on this family's front yards, and they're not really too sure what to really do about this. It's an interesting idea, but upon watching the film, I don't know, would this concept have been better suited for like a short film or a short horror story or something? Because in a feature film format, I just don't think it really works that much. Like, as I said, the movie does kind of try to throw some things in there with, how the main character has recently become the widow to her children following the death of her husband and stuff. And as I said, like, there could have been something interesting that you could have done with that. And, like, honestly, I just don't think they really executed it that well. Like, really, this movie is honestly quite boring, as I said, for a lot of it. Like, there really is just a bunch of these scenes where we'll have our characters just kind of in the house, and while the woman's outside, and they're kind of just talking. They're having a bit of a struggle and stuff, and like, it could have been interesting, but I just don't think it really was. It all just kind of felt a bit tedious to me, and honestly just kind of boring. Like, as I said, the woman herself doesn't even really do a lot in this movie. She does kind of spend a good chunk of the film just kind of sitting out on the lawn, like out on the front yard. But like, this isn't something now where it's like, oh, like, you can feel her presence. It's so creepy. Like, there's just a woman sitting out on the front yards, and like, the characters aren't really doing a lot about it. And like, I know they established that there's kind of one or two kind of little reasons why, but it just kind of comes off as a bit boring, and I just couldn't really get all that interested in it. As I said earlier, this movie was quite different to how the trailers made it look, because with the trailers, they just made it look like, another kind of generic, kind of ghost horror movie or something, or some kind of demon horror, when this movie isn't really like that at all. The movie kind of does go for something a bit different, which I do appreciate that, don't get me wrong, but I just could not get with the execution of it, because, like, I will say, the third act of this movie in particular, it is quite bad. Like, during the film's third act, we actually start getting, revelations about stuff, and then some stuff starts to reveal itself, and we do kind of figure out, what this woman actually is, and, why she's just sitting out there on the yard and stuff. But like, ultimately, I just don't think it was executed well. It could have been interesting, but I just don't think they executed it very well at all. Like, and not to mention, it even kind of convolutes things and actually makes scenes from earlier a little like confusing as to how they happen. Like, there is a scene in this, like, kind of trying, like, when the third act begins, when the woman actually does decide to start, attacking them, and like she kind of starts like throwing stuff down in the house and stuff. And I won't lie, when I was watching that scene, I did think, oh, okay, now this is actually a pretty cool scene, like, because there is a bit of suspense during all this. But then a little while later, and then when we actually find out, like, kind of what the woman actually is, it actually just makes that scene from earlier just feel confusing as to, how it actually happened and stuff. And this is definitely one that is gonna conflict people for sure. Like, yeah, all I'll say is the third act of this movie in particular, I do not think it is gonna sit well with some people. I can definitely tell. But like, I do think some of this genuinely could have worked, but I just felt that the execution of it was quite weak. So, yeah, overall, I'd say that, like, they had some interesting ideas with the plot, but I felt the execution of it was quite fumbled. And in terms of the film's narrative structure now, we do have our main plot with, kind of, this woman is sitting out in the yard and they don't know, like, what they're going to do about her. But, of course, we do kind of have a bit of a subplot with, like, how the fact that, like, the mother, Ramona, has recently become a widow after her husband dies. And, like, they do actually try to kind of, kind of add all this together during the third act, kind of start to, combine things together and stuff. And yeah, there is definitely like a bit of like an allegory, kind of a theme in this movie of, a bit of like a heavy topic. But really, I just don't think they executed very well because, like, as I said, it's just way too confusing and convoluted in how it happens, and like it even kind of makes earlier scenes just seem very like confusing in hindsight, and they just don't really make a lot of sense. And like even with the ending of the film, they try to be a bit ambiguous about it, but I just don't think that really worked at all. So yeah, overall, I would say that the narrative structure in this was quite poor. So yeah, overall, I have to say The Woman in the Yard was just a pretty bad film. Yes, another stinker for Blumhouse, but it is interesting how the movie still sucked, but in a way that I wasn't expecting it to. But at the end of the day, it is still a bad film. And it's a shame because there actually is some good stuff in there. Like, as I said, there's good cinematography, there's cool sound design, there actually is some solid performances, and like even some of like the concepts with this film could have worked, but I just felt the execution of it really brought it down, and how it tried to handle it all and how it kind of tried to execute it all. Like, it just didn't work for me. Again, this movie really would have worked better as just like a short horror film because it just clearly doesn't work that much in like a feature length format. So yeah, overall, I can't say that I enjoyed this movie very much. I wouldn't really be recommending this, to be honest. Like, yeah, this was just a stinker. Definitely one of the worst films I've seen so far this year. Now, hopefully, with all the other movies that they're putting out this year, Blumhouse, do pick it up from here. But yeah, they'll have to pick up for sure because this was just bad. So, yeah, with all that said, I'm going to give The Woman in the Yard a 3 out of 10. So, with that, I'll see you guys next time, and bye.